Okay, well, we've gone live again. I do firstly want to apologise to everybody for having to leave yesterday. I got a call out, and I do have to warn you that the phone could ring again today. Just a little bit of insight without giving too much away. We've had a child being abused by a man, at least verbally, and the police could ring. So do excuse me if the phone rings and I have to cut off. I do ask for your forgiveness. Now, when I left off yesterday, we were into it. We were right into it. And we were talking about Hillsong in 1995, how they broke through into the Christian music arena. And it was led by a gentleman by the name of Jeff Bullock, who was a man that believed deeply in the grace of God. And a wonderful man, wrote some terrific music and still does. But what he talks about in his testimony after leaving Hillsong is the fact that he was overwhelmed by the popularity and the expectation that was put on him to be an entertainer, as it were, where he said that he wasn't that kind of person. So I want to read this. I'll just shut these doors. And this is what Jeff says about him losing his marriage, consequently losing his marriage and everything after he left Hillsong. Jeff's marriage was terminally damaged before he left Hills. It was over before I knew it, he says. I was just too busy to even notice what was happening. Now, this is common for many, 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 many people that are trying to please the Lord in these organizations. And I do just want to say, if you missed the live, please don't send an apology. I understand everybody has different time phases and schedules. I do understand. Welcome if you've just picked up on the live. But I'm talking about Jeff Bullock. And in 1995, Hillsong broke through into the Christian music realm. And Jeff's marriage was terminally damaged before he left Hills. He decided that he needed to leave. And he says, it was over before I knew it. I was just too busy to even notice what was happening. People asked him, weren't there signs? Now, there are signs, but when you're overwhelmed in serving Jehovah or whatever it is, I've always said you take for granted the people that are closest to you. And this is one of the first signs of potential religious evil. And he says, of course there were signs, but we just thought, okay, we'll just have to work harder. Now, they went in the opposite direction. Well, they went in the direction of, well, we'll just have to work harder. We'll go deeper. We'll go harder. We'll serve God harder. Now, I find this really interesting because I do these lives straight off the cuff. I don't do any preparation or anything, which is probably slack. But Jeff Bullock actually said when his marriage was starting to crumble that he just thought they would work harder and serve God harder. And this is what they teach you. Oh, you're not praying enough. Oh, you're not serving enough. Oh, you're not doing this enough. This could be the reason why, you're doing this wrong with Jehovah or God. And so he decides to work even harder as if he wasn't working hard enough. We'll do more for God and he will bless us. That is what they thought. And this is not uncommon. This is what happens. We don't see half of it, but this is what happens throughout Christianity on a daily basis. I wonder what the statistics really are for families breaking up and falling to pieces. So the point of what I'm trying to lead to here is, and I've always said this, when you think there is something you need to do or not do to make God happy or stop him from being sad, you're actually putting yourself in a position where you are turning yourself not only against yourself internally, but you start to neglect the people around you, or you try and bring them with you. And if they don't come with you, then something inside you starts to scout around for somebody that's, at the same spiritual level as what you think you are, but you may not. See, it's a minefield. Religion is a minefield. So he said, we'll do more for God and he will bless us. That is the greatest deception in modern Christianity today. We'll do more for God and he will bless us. Well, for Jeff, it wasn't the case. And he says this: we separated within weeks of leaving Hills. It was a very hard time, and it got worse as the months went on. I know what it's like personally to lose a family to this kind of devotion to the serving God. And I can fully relate to what happened to Jeff Bullock. But Jeff Bullock was a very successful Christian person. I was just a nominal, nothing Christian person. And he says, I had to face the fact of my failure as a husband and a father, something you never really get over. Suddenly, although it was very important to others, leaving Hills was not very important to me. So we finally got a correct context on what was actually important. See, putting the religion and the Hills and everything else first, and putting all his time into that, and building the fame and all the rest of it, which he didn't really want, cost him his family because he neglected his family. And this is happening throughout the Jehovah Witnesses today. I got an interesting comment from a person, and I think I'll read it if you don't mind. Let me just find it. It was a very interesting comment. Please forgive me. I'm just going to try and find it. I thought it was fantastic, actually. It's not going to come up. Come on. That computer's running slow. I wonder why all of a sudden that computer's running slow. But anyway, they were saying that the early Bible students were one thing, but the Jehovah Witnesses now, the second, third, and fourth generation of these people is even worse, like psychologically and spiritually degraded even, and gotten more twisted. So Jeff says, it was not the main issue. The greatest tragedy was the consequences that years of poor stewardship. Now, poor stewardship means he wasn't managing his finances properly, in the sense that he was probably giving everything to God and neglecting again his family. I know what all this is about. Then he says, and a woeful lack of priorities had visited on all of us. So they put the priorities towards the organization, which was prospering. That was in 1995 was when Hillsong broke through. And it's cost Jeff Bullock his family. And then he says, after about 10 months, right, of all this turmoil and upheaval and the loss of his family and all the rest of it, he says, I fell in love with somebody I'd known for a long time. I was so despondent. And that's, so you end up alone. If you fall out with an organization, you end up shunned. You end up exiled. And this is what Jeff Bullock experienced. And he said, I was so despondent and disappointed with the way everything had gone that basically when I hit a rock in the middle of a raging stream, I held on to it. In other words, he met somebody and he grabbed hold of that person and he wasn't going to let that person go. And it just happened. So obviously it wasn't a relationship that was ever going to flourish into anything. I'm not sure of the true nature of how this all panned out, but what it basically is was he put too much into the organization and it cost him everything that was important to him. See, you can only take so much religious stress before it becomes too much. I want to say this as it comes to mind. A lot of modern day Christian teaching is not meant for congregationalists or the laity. They're trying to put leadership principles onto congregational people that just want to come in on a Sunday and listen to the message and go home. They start telling these people that you need to do this and you need to do that, and if you do this, God will give you that, just like what happened to Jeff Bullock. They thought when things were collapsing that they needed to try harder, and they tried so hard thinking that God was going to bless them, they lost each other, they lost their family. He lost his ability to be a father because obviously the kids were taken away, and now he's in an unmarital affair. Affair outside of marriage. He says, then there are no excuses. But let me just say this: while his life's collapsing around him, Hillsong's going on without him. They just replaced him. So while he was one of the main foundations in the Hillsong success, they just went on without him while his life came down all around him. Can you see what I'm saying? This is how shunning works. If you're not going to go with the train, we'll just leave you at the station and go on without you. We think we're important when we're not. I just think I'm going to sneeze, so excuse me if I sneeze. Sorry. So he says there were no excuses. We broke many lives. The affair that he had made things even worse because it wasn't reflecting a Christian lifestyle, see? We disappointed many friends. We hurt many people. As the dust cleared, we realized that we couldn't go back and fix what was broken. And this is the tragedy of religious evil. When we think there's something we need to do or not do to make God happy or stop him from being sad, this is a classic example. One of the foundation members of the success of Hillsong gives us a classic example of where it can all end up. Even if you know the grace of God, which this man did. And he says, we realized that we couldn't go back and fix what was broken. All we could do was slowly work through all the consequences. And we still do, and we always will. I said in one of my presentations that sometimes if you want to tamper with the devil and demons, they won't leave you for months or years. This is exactly, I believe, is what's happened to Jeff Bullock. After Jeff's sense of brokenness and overwhelming, within days he cancelled all his ministry engagements, resigned his credentials as an Assembly of God minister, wrote to the Christian bookstores who sold this product, and to 8,000 churches telling them of his situation. I had got to the point where even my integrity had deserted me. So in his pursuit to the height of heights and then deciding that it just wasn't for him and getting out, it still plagued him after he left. You see the consequences. Telling them of his situation. At that point, I had no desire to continue in ministry because I disqualified myself and I didn't need anyone else to tell me that. I just had to find a way of stopping all my engagements and then getting the news out as best I could without uncovering everybody's story. We hoped that then we could deal with all the consequences privately. The trouble is, it didn't happen that way. When there is no easy way of leaving these organizations, there is no easy way. Let me just see if I can reduce this page. Can I, given that it's alive? No one's here, so I can try. What if I do that? Where am I? There? No, it's still there. So here's a classic example of a successful person. There are other stories of other people. What I'm trying to say is, and you'll see it in my videos, the sins of sexual abuse and the crimes of sexual abuse within religious organizations. On the one hand, there are just degenerate people that are going to come into these organizations and be unable to restrain their lust in the situations in which they get access to people that are vulnerable. Then you get the good intending people that have never done a thing wrong in their lives that get hold of religion and they end up like Jeff Bullock, but more on an evil side where they start to perform evil acts because they've aroused their sinful nature to a point, Romans 7 and 6, as to where they've got no control over what they're doing at all. Well, I've got no viewers. I've put in 15 minutes. The phone could ring any tick of the clock, I don't know, like it did yesterday, so I don't blame anyone for not watching. There was an instance in the church I was in. The youth pastor, I think he was in his 40s, started to tamper with one of the teenagers. And he got caught. But I'll tell you this, I'm not sure, but I am really not sure if they reported it to the police, to be honest. I think it was dealt with within the church between the offender and the parents and the minister. I'm not 100% sure. I'd left by then, but I got wind of it, and you would never have picked this person to have done something of such a nature. This person you would not have flawed in any way, but the next thing he's in his youth ministry tampering with a 15 or 14-year-old girl, and it's gotten caught. Cost him his marriage, cost him his ministry, cost him his reputation. But I just don't think that they called the police on that one. I don't know what the extent of the circumstances were. But there was another person who had sold himself so far out for the organisation that he'd lost sight of what was important to him, and his lust had run away with him. In Ephesians, it says that our lust can deceive us, or we're deceived by deceitful lusts. And these deceitful lusts come out of, again, I know I'm sounding monotonous, they come out of the things we think we need to do or not do to make God happy or stop him from being sad, outside the fact of the finished work of Christ. We all want to believe in the finished work of Christ. Between alcohol and drugs and on the one hand, and all the other stuff that substance abuse, which heightens sexual abuse, religious abuse is one of these ones that gets done deeply behind closed doors. And when I say behind closed doors, it's very well hid on the exterior of a person's countenance. Whereas drug abuse and all these other things you can pick up in the system, and they do blood tests, and you can see by the condition of their face and their skin and all that sort of stuff. But religiously performed evil is the most cunning of evil. It's the most cunning of evil and the most harmful of evil, because it's hard to nail. Now, in the case of the Jehovah Witnesses, where they use the 2-witness rule, which was an Old Testament principle that they took from Jesus', they don't even do it right. It says take the problem to the person. If they don't agree, take the problem to 2, and if you can't work it out there, take the problem to the church. In other words, stand in front of the church in a sensible way and see if you can come to some sense of wisdom. And there's a danger in that, because some people in churches are just, I'm sorry, plain stupid and unhelpful and selfish and destructive. But what the object of it was we've got to make it, you know what the object of it was? Transparency. And the 2-witness rule, in which the way that the Jehovah Witnesses uses it, it doesn't allow transparency to work. It doesn't allow transparency in trying to resolve the issue to work. In fact, it takes transparency away, because it now isolates the victim, again, to the mercy of the perpetrator. And then the victim is left to the wisdom of the elders, which we know is too often limited. Now, I had a bit of an argument with the two guys I'm studying, the two elders I'm studying with about this, and I said, there's been a few changes in the Shepherd of the God, whatever it is, book that you have, and he goes, oh yeah. But they argued the fact that they would ring the police in the case of sexual abuse. But it wasn't convincing to me, because they'll say anything again, the Jehovah Witnesses will, in 9 times out of 10, they'll say anything to you to your face, but behind your back, it's a totally different story. So the 2-witness rule has been taken so far out of context. I'm surprised the Australian Royal Commission didn't. Well, I'm not sure what power they've got to come into influencing or forcing religions to change things. What I do know is Western Australia has now brought in a rule where there is no such thing as clergy secrecy if it's a criminal act. The clergy have to report it. And I hope that sweeps right across the world, because if it does, it's going to take away so much harm, religious harm and destruction. Because these people that are usually related to the elders, or in cahoots with the elders or are elders, will be facing criminal charges. So I've shared about Jeff Bullock. I think that might be the police. We've had a case of verbal abuse on a baby next door, and we're just waiting for the police to turn up. The dogs are going stupid next door. But yeah, so, oh gee, I don't know. A little baby crying next door, right? And you've got this grown man yelling and screaming and telling it to shut up. So my daughter's in the police, and I rang her up and I've gone, what do I do? She goes, call the police. Don't go in there yourself. So I did. And I think the police are dealing with it now. So if my phone rings, do excuse me, because I made the call and they took my details. I can't take children being abused. You give any sign of a child being abused in front of me and I'll call the police straight away. In fact, any form of abuse, I'll call the police. I won't tolerate it. So I don't know if I've been of any help. I've tried to be. There's so much information coming out on the internet now. I can't see why anyone would remain ignorant. I've done in an hour my information for the Jehovah Witness study on Thursday with the elders, but I don't think they're going to swallow any of that. I've mainly got Jehovah Witness references from the JW Facts website, which I'm going to present because it presents the argument out of JW, what are they, Watchtower magazine arguments. But I will say, look, thank you for joining me. I better go and see what's happening out here. I think the police are out the front next door. This is Dr. Jason W. Morrison, Theologist, New South Wales, Australia. Watch some of my videos on things like maybe the book of James even, or Hebrews. They all show you that the whole New Testament really is about separating people from thinking there's something they need to do or not do to make God happy or stop him from being sad, and living under the grace of God, knowing that everything's all right and to get on with your life. As we saw with Jeff Bullock, even after he left Hillsong, everything fell down around him because he left it too late. It was too late to repair. It was irreparable. And there are millions of people in this situation now. This is Dr. Jason W. Morrison, Theologist, New South Wales, Australia. Bye for now.